just caught up with the Book of Boba Fett because I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but a lot of the Marvel shows that are on Disney Plus have not spoken to me. They've not really convinced me to queue them up. Whereas of the two, if I had to choose between Marvel and Star Wars, I would go Star Wars every day of the week. That's just who I am. If I'm going to pick a weird spin-off show that isn't really as good as the movies, it's going to be Book of Boba Fett, I suppose. That's the one that's going to win out. But it's still a very meh show.
I know it's supposed to show Boba Fett being older, but Tamura Morrison is so old, it's implausible that he's Boba Fett. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to believe an old dude who has trouble, with flexibility is still like a feared bounty hunter. And I remember in the first episode where I think they were like surrounded by people's shields.
Yes.
And his first reaction was to fire a rocket at him from like 3 feet away. And I was like, what is that? I don't understand.
That was a bizarre fight scene. And Corey, like, that whole episode was directed by Robert Rodriguez too, who is usually known as like a master of like coherent, cool action. He's kind of built his career on cool action stuff and, being a kind of a genre guy who knows his way around stuff. But I don't know, that episode didn't have any of the usual Rodriguez hallmarks. The combat and the action felt very leaden, just kind of like...
Yeah, it's too choreographed and it's too slow. It's almost like the lightsaber fight in the throne room where it looks cool, but you break it down, you're like... Okay, why is that stuntman standing there for 3 seconds waiting for his cue?
Yes, yeah, and I don't know what the problem is. If it's just they're rushing through the production and they're not spending enough time on choreography, or what. But something is weird because it's a problem that continues through the other episodes too, where scenes that are supposed to feel fast paced and high action feel just kind of slow and dragged out, and
right.
It's not like there aren't people at Lucasfilm who can pull it off because we've seen them do the exact same stuff in the movies very well. So I'm not sure what the disconnect is. Maybe it's just the TV budget, but...
It can't be. They're in the hundreds of millions in that budget for that.
Yeah. So like, what's going on is the question. I don't know why they're making these choices. The some of the stuff is interesting. Like, so like, because I have a habit of getting lost in the lore of it. So for all of the scenes where the action is really boring, there are moments where I'm like, oh, okay. And you're drawing the connections between where the characters have been. And it's kind of like clicking through the Wikipedia articles to an extent, because you're starting to see the little lines they're drawing, and for a hardcore fan like me, that is enough to keep me interested.
Right, fair.
But if you were just a casual fan, or if you're not really getting into all of those interconnected bits, then you're going to tune out of this. I think it doesn't have the snap of the Mandalorian at all.
Yeah, again, which is why it was dumb to end the Mandalorian the way it did, because I feel like there were so many other stories they could have told, and we're going to have an Ahsoka show as well. An
Ahsoka show. There's going to be an Obi-Wan show. I think
that's going to be interesting.
They still have that sort of espionage tinted show set around Cassian Andor from Rogue One. So they got a lot of stuff in the pipeline, but maybe this was an easy one for them to knock out because they had Tamura Morrison around and they had the costumes and stuff from the Mandalorian. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess fair enough.
But yeah, if you're a big Star Wars nerd like me and you're not interested in the Marvel stuff, then maybe give it a watch. I don't know. It's a real toss up. But should we get into the bulk of the episode?
Yes, let's do it.
Welcome to the Extra Buttery Podcast. It's a show about movies, TV, anything with a story and actors on a screen, really. Join Jason Chan and Robert Snow's free-flowing conversation with deep dives into characters and plot with the occasional salty opinion. So get your popcorn, I got mine right here. Let's start the show!
thanks for joining us. This is the 104th episode of the Extra Buttery Podcast. My name is Jason Chen, Vancouver. I'm joined by my co-host Robert Snow.
Hello, hello, hello.
And we got a pretty special episode for you guys. We're going to debate Matrix Resurrections, the newest entry into this sci-fi action franchise. And we're going to go over our top 10 list for 2021. I know it's been like a COVID-shortened, COVID-abbreviated, COVID-affected year, but there are a lot of good films that still came out. So I'm curious to see what our top 10 lists look like, because I do think there will be some major differences.
Yeah, I can already anticipate a few, but looking forward to that.
Okay, so let me start. First of all, last episode, you asked me to defend Spider-Man No Way Home with my 4.5 out of 5 star rating. I did. Letterboxd. Admittedly, I admit is generous, but again, I see the merits of the film. I don't see any real flaws with it. Now, Matrix Resurrections has been, I think, divisive to say the least.
Yeah, pretty split on Rotten Tomatoes.
Right. And as usual, Rob and I have our disagreements, but this one in particular caught my eye because I feel like Robert needs to defend his 5 out of 5 rating for Matrix Resurrections more so than I need to defend for No Way Home. So, Rob, why don't you just start with like the plot synopsis and then get into your thoughts?
Okay, I'm glad you're structuring it like this. This is good. It'll keep us on target. So yeah, The Matrix Resurrections, this is the 4th film in the Matrix franchise. I think it's a film that not a lot of people anticipated would actually get made until very recently. You know, with the first 3 films in the franchise coming out in 99, and then the 2 sequels coming really close together. What was the interval between the sequels? Like a few months, basically?
Yeah, I believe they were filmed simultaneously.
Yeah.
And released like less than a year apart.
Yeah, in 2003. So, and of course, infamously, Matrix Revolutions, the 3rd film, ended with an ending that, at the time, I remember fans being pretty lukewarm about. You know, it felt we had Neo basically doing a very Jesus Christ type move of sacrificing himself for the greater good of humanity, negotiating a truce with the machines that had been running the Matrix and keeping everyone in their pods, and giving humans an opportunity to potentially break free the way he did. So it was kind of like, it was a compromise. Not everyone was happy. It certainly didn't give us the kind of like ride off into the sunset ending that maybe narratively some people wanted, i.e. Neo and Trinity getting to spend the rest of their lives together in some kind of freedom.
Right. Did you like the original ending?
I remember when I mean, it's been a while since I've seen Revolutions. I've seen it a few times, but I remember understanding why people would be lukewarm on it. And then like over a decade goes by and nobody's really talking about making Matrix 4. And then the kind of whispers start going out there, you know, like the Wachowski sisters had made a bunch of weird stuff in the meantime, you know, Cloud Atlas, Jupiter Ascending, the show on Netflix, Sense8. A lot of it had gotten like really deep into all of the stuff that they had explored in the Matrix, but they were just kind of going even weirder and wilder with it. And then I guess Warner Brothers was looking around at the stable of stuff that they had that they could sequelize, and they said, why don't we make a Matrix film? Why don't we see, you know, what the appetite is like for it? And, you know, I guess they went up to the Wachowskis, but were only 50% successful in getting them on board to make a 4th film. They only got Lana Wachowski. Lily Wachowski, for whatever reason, wasn't interested. So Lana Wachowski teamed up, funnily enough, with someone she'd worked with in the past, David Mitchell, who had written the book that the Wachowski film Cloud Atlas had been based on. And they put together a screenplay, they filmed this thing, and they've released it into the world.
So deja vu. And yet it's obviously all wrong. Maybe this isn't the story we think it is.
They taught you good. Made you believe their world was all you deserved. But some part of you knew that was a lie. Some part of you remembered what was real.
And I am so happy they did in the way that they did. Because this is, and we were talking about this before we sat down to record, it's a messy film. I'll be the first of many to acknowledge that. I think a lot of the people who love this movie know that it's messy and it's got a weird tone and it suffers from some, odd decisions. But I think if you're going to be making a movie like The Matrix, or making a sequel to the Matrix franchise, in this world of the world is not as it was when the first Matrix movies came out. We've got the internet. We've got this whole other culture out there now. And it's a very self-referential culture. And I feel like in order to make a Matrix that kind of connects with the way people behave online today, you kind of have to make something that is not just a direct continuation of what we saw in Matrix Revolutions. You've got to have some sort of self-commentary, some sort of bit that kind of connects back to the philosophy and the ideas that were informing the original trilogy. Things like, where do our minds exist when we're fully online? How much of ourselves are we pouring into our experience online? How does that affect the life in the meat space, as it were? And Matrix Resurrections, for all of its weirdness, it does that. It picks up with Neo being in the Matrix again, and it's a Matrix that is aware of the fact that he was a savior type in the real world. And the machines have effectively brainwashed him and figured out how to make him believe that what he knows to be the truth was really a series of delusions, and that he drew on these delusions to make a video game that was exactly like what we saw in the Matrix trilogy. And so he now has to wake up again the way he did in the first film. And he has to kind of come back to the real world a second time, only to find that it's not nearly as black and white as it was before. And there's a lot of shades of gray. There's a lot of human-machine cooperation. And there are familiar faces from his past who don't see things the way they used to and are a lot more conservative than they once were. And I don't know, it's very much a film that's willing to change things, to shake things up, to not rely on the same old tropes. It's aware of the fact that both Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss cannot pull off the action scenes that they probably could have in their 30s. They're older now. We might not buy it if they were jumping around and doing bullet time sequences the way they once did. So it changes around those things, and it does different sorts of action scenes, and it's concerned about different stuff. And I think that's why I connected with it, because, I don't know, when we were talking about Spider-Man No Way Home, it just felt like, as Marvel films often do, they're fantastic at this. They are able to give you more of what you want with subtle little kind of refreshes or little twists or things to make you feel like you're getting a new story. But compare that with The Matrix Resurrections, where you are getting something very different and very self-aware in a way that I like, the way that didn't feel cheesy.
See, that it's so interesting that you say that, because how you feel about No Way Home and The Matrix is exactly how I feel, but opposite. So I do think the changes in No Way Home are significant. I don't think they're that subtle. Just the fact that we have Sony and Marvel working together and bringing all those actors together in this whole production. So what you said about Matrix Resurrections, about it being a messy film, I think that's where it really tripped me up. The reasons that you listed are all the reasons why I didn't like it.
Okay, yeah.
Now, the part about Matrix being different, I get stylistically it's different. It's a different movie for a different audience in a different age. But at the same time, I don't find the story more compelling than it ever was. Keeping in mind that I didn't hate Matrix Reloaded or Revolutions as most people did. I actually kind of like the ending with Revolutions. I like the shaky truce. I like the unease of which they all go into the future, because I feel like that is very much where we still are in society in regards to technology. I do think Matrix Resurrections follows a lot of tropes. Chief among them, the dumb hero. And also, I didn't particularly like... Are we going to spoilers now?
Let's hold off a little. Give me a little bit more of what you don't like.
Okay, so I didn't appreciate the relationship and how they handled Neo and Trinity in this one.
Interesting. Okay.
I didn't like the... It's so hard to discuss this without going into spoilers, but I didn't like how they were seen as almost one character.
Okay. Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Like, especially the ending scene. And I thought some of the more interesting stuff happened within like the first 45 hour of the film. First of all, it's way too long, in my opinion. But the first hour introduced some really interesting ideas, but I felt that they just abandoned. I don't think being meta is very interesting to me, at least not anymore, at least not in the way The Matrix was, where they reference, video games, the sequel, the trilogy, the legacy, and even the studio itself, where they talk about Warner Brothers wanting a fourth film for the trilogy.
Yeah,
I know I didn't appreciate it. I think that is almost like something that I would see on a Funny or Die skit.
Maybe.
It's a little too satirical when I felt like the first three films definitely took themselves a lot more seriously.
Okay. Well, let me posit this to you then before we get into spoilers.
Okay. Sure.
Assuming that Warner Brothers had met all of the Wachowskis' demands and had let them, or had convinced them to make a direct sequel to Revolutions that fit everything that we knew about The Matrix up until that point, and just did a fourth one of that.
Uh-huh.
And, they got Lawrence Fishburne back, and they got, and it was just like, they said, oh, okay. They came up with a retcon way of how Neo survived what he experienced at the end of Revolutions, and he's back and he's still the one, and he's still got more fighting to do, and the war isn't over, and we've got to, I don't know, defend another human city or something. And, wouldn't you think that version of the fourth film would be, I don't know, more of the same, like just another kind of carbon copy of Revolutions, where the war didn't end, nothing Neo did in the conclusion really mattered because they need an excuse to restart the battle between the humans and the machines again.
Yeah, so for sure, I 100% agree with you there. But let's kind of roll it back and just let me start off by saying that I think this is an unnecessary sequel.
Okay.
So even had they copied like the same style as the original trilogy, I probably still wouldn't be as warm to it for the reasons you said. Like, it's just too much of the same. It wasn't probably doing anything interesting following what Revolutions talk about. That was kind of my other question to you, is that sometimes I felt that Lana Wachowski made this film only because the studio asked her to. And that had she not been involved, they would have just given it to someone else to work on.
Oh, they would have. Yeah, that's the genesis of the joke from Jonathan Groff's character in this film, where he says they're going to do it with or without you.
Exactly.
So then I'm thinking to myself, okay, we've actually got three possible scenarios now. We have the future where they directly sequelize, they make a fourth film like the way I described. Mm-hmm. We have the film that we got, or we have the film that might have been made without the Wachowskis' involvement whatsoever, that, I don't know, would have done like that Pirates of the Caribbean thing where they pick a new young hero with some up-and-coming actor we don't know very well, and then Neo and Trinity have little cameos partway through to kind of pass the torch. I feel like all of those alternate options from what we actually got would have been so much worse. So if the train is coming towards us and we're going to get a fourth Matrix film no matter what, I would prefer to get what we got. And as a result, I was pleasantly surprised. And I think that, that it beat my expectations in certain ways. And it got a more positive reaction from me because I was like, okay, cool. Of all the possible options, this is the best one, I think.
So in your scenario, to me, door number 3 seems more interesting, in part because we saw what they could do with the Animatrix, which I think is like the more proper sort of sequel prequel to The Matrix.
Yeah.
So that's where I would have come from. I think the Wachowskis' visions, like The Matrix is their baby. I don't think any other director could have replicated that.
Right.
But we are dealing with hypothetical. So it's something I would have rather seen than what I saw. But honestly, the fourth option to me was the best one, and that was no sequel at all. Like, they should have just left the trilogy alone, though, right? Maybe,
but you're never going to get that because we're at that kind of juncture of like, art versus commerce again, which happens all so often. So like you get, if there's no possible future where Warner Brothers was going to let this IP sit out of the interest of like preserving the art of it,
To me, at times, the film felt like an FU to the studio. and a little bit to the audience.
Which I love. I love that they are taking an active role in that. And I think that it got like an extra half star for that very reason,
Really?
because they're like, if they're going to challenge this kind of like, I don't know, Hollywood blockbuster explosion or whatever you want to call it, this whatever's happening to big IP driven movies these days, if they're going to challenge it in some way, I'd prefer them to kind of do that middle finger and say, no, movies can be different. They can comment on themselves. They can be self-aware to an extent. I would prefer them to do that than just sort of roll over and be like, okay, fine, we'll just make more sequels.
So in that sense, I didn't care for it. Like, I mean, I don't care that you're trying to, all the things they said about the industry and the sequel and stuff, like, it felt like hitting the nail over the head over and over again to me. Like, I feel like I've seen this message a million times in every other meta show that you can think of. Like, you can even go to like Community or Parks and Rec where they're really referential. And I thought that was way more clever than how The Matrix did it. And honestly, if a director is saying F you to the audience, F you to the studio with this film, I also get kind of turned off because it's kind of like, why am I wasting my time then? Like, I don't really care about your petty feud. I don't really care about, your battles with your studio and all this stuff. And I didn't find the social commentary that deep. The one thing that did kind of catch my attention was the aspect of the robot civil war that they touched on, the planet of Io. I thought that was really interesting, but that was only, that whole part was ruined by the fact that on one of those missions, the pilot, I can't remember his name, high-fived that little Transformer dude. I couldn't get past that. That felt like a Michael Bay Transformer thing, where I was like, the humor was so bad.
Maybe, yeah.
And I didn't laugh at any of the jokes, and I didn't find anything particularly noteworthy or made my brain kind of like turn a little. In fact, in the middle, I kind of got bored. I feel like I kind of dozed off a little bit near the middle.
I went into this like, because people have critiqued the action in it. They don't like that bullet time was basically neutered.
That was edited funny, don't you think?
No, I didn't find it weird. I just
like the Neil Patrick Harris like different interpolation frame rate thing. I thought that didn't feel right. Like maybe that was the intent.
I think that was the intent, and I understood the intent, so I didn't. A lot of people found fault with those sequences, and I thought they were all right. I understood what they were trying to do at the very least.
The car chase was cool. I didn't care for any of the other.
Car chase was cool. The fight in the warehouse wasn't that great. It didn't have the kind of Matrix pop that you want.
Yeah, I didn't like the Merovingian, what they did with him.
He's very brief, but I mean, they're already introducing so many characters. I mean, do you really need the Merovingian to become another distraction?
Well, I mean, who do they really introduce though? Like, there's a couple people in their crew where like they really don't get any development at all.
Well, exactly. So like, you can't bring the Merovingian in and just say like, okay, he's going to be another whole character introduced halfway through the film on top of all these other people you already have to know.
But he's not introduced. He's like there. We've known him for 2 movies now, right?
Yeah. But
so you're building on something rather than introducing a whole crew from the Nimicine, which I thought was just a really boring crew.
He serves a purpose, though, because he is the most recognizable face out of all of the programs that have been kicked out of the Matrix in favor of the new model. So he's kind of like the...
Wouldn't the Agent Smith be that guy? Agent Smith, because, oh my God, we're going to spoiler territory, aren't we?
And the movie's been out for almost like
so,
a month. So
at the end where Agent Smith kind of turns on the Matrix, to me, that was the bigger, more impactful turn of events rather than the Merovingian being pissed.
Oh yeah, hands down. Yeah, no disagreement here. But I feel, and what I wrote in my review too, which you should totally check, everyone listening to this should check out if you want a little bit more in depth on what we're talking about here. But I argued that one thing that this movie does is that it helps reframe what we've already seen, which I think a good sequel will do. A good sequel will pick up on things in the preceding films, and it will give us a new way of looking at it. And even though it does this in a slightly cheesy or sentimental way, it does prove that a lot of the Matrix films that came before were actually love stories in a very protracted way. It was between Neo and Trinity, and And this film leans hard on that because it hinges a lot of the success and failure of this new version of the Matrix on whether or not they can be held in check. If they get too close to each other, the system will fail and they will be able to reassert control as the one again. But if they're kept sort of distant and under the machine's power, then this new version of the Matrix remains stable. So it's this very tenuous kind of balance. And obviously, you know, Neo and Trinity don't like this situation. They want to be together. So I think that's, you know, that's the classic love story that you would find in any other genre. And some people might roll their eyes, but
I did.
Okay.
Because I was just going to say, like, the whole love story and the whole coffee shop stuff and how they keep bumping each other, it feels like serendipity on steroids.
Sure. But I mean,
and I didn't appreciate the whole bit at the end where they are basically like two halves of one whole.
Yeah.
I think that's more of a commentary about like Lana and Lily Wachowski's transgender status.
Sure, but I mean, the first Matrix was that too.
How so?
Well, you know, subsequently, years after the Matrix films came out, a lot of people kind of revisited them and said, oh, at the time that the Wachowskis made these, they identified as men, as the way they were born. But as the films had been out for a while, and as they, you know, developed as people, they recognized their transgender status. You know, they came out as women. And so the Matrix films were then sort of seen in a new light as being like, oh, the characters that they created for those things are connecting with the reality outside of the one that they've been placed into, you know? So it becomes, all three of the films together became a sort of trans allegory for people who want to see that in the story, right? So the fact that they're continuing that idea in the fourth film isn't super new. It's just, you know, it's
not super new. I just felt that was more of a statement for the director themselves, or herself, I should say, rather than the story. Like, it just didn't feel like a natural progression for the characters to end up where they did in Resurrections.
Really? Because, I mean, they've always wanted to be together, and there was this sense of loss in Revolutions when, you know, Neo was able to save Trinity within the Matrix by using his one powers to, like, you know, heal that bullet wound. But then when it came time to pull off a mission in the real world, he couldn't save her because he's just a dude.
Yeah, that, you know what? I love that. I think the ending, how it's very mixed, really works for the Matrix, because it's always been about, like, a lot of people are like a red pill versus blue pill. There's no real like right answer to me. Like, if you choose to stay in the Matrix, like, I don't blame you.
Yeah.
And if you take the red pill, fine. That's perfectly fine with me. And I think Neo does already make the ultimate sacrifice to save Trinity, and she does it too, right? I think she saves him on multiple occasions. And I thought that was perfect. I didn't really need to see them fly in the air and have, you know, Trinity proven that she is, I guess, the flipped version of Neo in this case.
Right.
I just didn't find it as big of a political statement as many thought it was, I guess.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. And I just think, you know, in the original trilogy, I think Neo as the male and protagonist was a very dumb protagonist. I think the hero in those original trilogies was actually Trinity. She's the one that continuously believes in him. He's just the one who takes a leap of faith, and he's like, okay, fine, I believe you guys. But Trinity is really, I think, the big motivator and the one that ends up pulling the strings of what happens in the first three films. I did like how they redid the whole doors opening, mirrors replacing phone booths deal.
Yeah, because they had to come up with something that, you know, people don't...
Because there's no phone booths anymore.
No phone booths. People don't even answer the smartphones that they have in their pocket. You know, it's all done through other means. So yeah, they had to think those things through. And, but I don't know.
Did you go in with lower expectations though?
I went in with like medium expectations, where I had been sufficiently impressed by the trailer because I just like the cinematography. Other people have said that they hate the cinematography, that they think it looks cheap.
Count me as one of those, actually.
I don't know. I think I liked the color palette that the cinematographer had. I liked I
loved the whole like dirty underground feel of the first three movies.
Yeah. So they didn't really get that kind of grunginess.
No, I think they went far away from that. Yeah.
But that also serves that comments a little bit on, you know, how technology in our own lives has vastly changed in the past 20 years. You know, like we've moved from analog to digital in so many different ways in meat space. You know, they're acknowledging what has happened outside of the world of movies to an extent.
Did you like Jonathan Groff? Because I did.
I thought he was good.
Yeah. On the other hand, I didn't really appreciate MPH as the analyst. I thought that was a weird sort of casting choice because I don't know, he never felt menacing as a villain, which I think was one of like the hallmarks of the original trilogy, where Hugo Weaving was, I think, really creepy.
Yeah, it's hard to replace Hugo Weaving's presence in the first three movies. So it would have been nice to see him back.
So there's one point in the movie where Neil Patrick Harris was like, the more we keep these people busy and angry, the easier it is to control them. I thought that was really interesting. And did you ever find that maybe the blue pill, the black cat, the intersplice images from the previous Matrix trilogies got a little bit grating? It's kind of like after the first hour, it's like, okay, we kind of get the idea.
Yes, I agree with you on that. Yeah, they didn't need to lean on the original film footage quite so much.
Yeah, especially if they're trying to make like a different kind of statement.
Yeah.
I almost feel like if you're going to distance yourself, then really distance yourself. But maybe that was a studio thing where you're like, we need to remind people of how great the original Matrix trilogies were.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know that Lana Wachowski had final cut on this. It's possible that she had to submit to studio notes and stuff. So I'm sure that story will come out in due time.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait for the production history of this.
Yeah. But it doesn't seem like it was particularly fraught. Like, you know, I'm sure she was well aware of why she was hired and what the terms of the engagement were. So I don't think
terms of engagement. I like that. Like a war.
Probably. Yeah. Because I doubt she was the one who pitched it to WB.
Oh yeah, they definitely pitched them, and then they said no, and then WC said, "Well, screw you guys. We're gonna do this movie." And then they're like, "Well, okay, no, we can't let you do that. So let me just write this treatment. Let me direct it." And the Warner Brothers said, "Fine." I think that's what happened. Yeah. Long story short.
Yeah. But in the grand, like, the grand scheme of like Warner Brothers doing films that reference themselves and reference other properties, I mean, aren't you glad that we got this than, you know, Space Jam: A New Legacy? Because,
well, see,
obviously
I was not hyped for either of them. I still haven't seen Space Jam New Legacy. Is that what it's called? Space Jam New Legacy?
Yeah, Space Jam 2. Yeah.
Okay, because like screw LeBron James. I don't like him anyway. And nothing will ever top Michael Jordan. But I mean, it's one of just like unnecessary sequels that obviously, you know, try to make it, you know, more higher brain, galaxy brain, and try to make some money that I just disagree with fundamentally. So anyway.
Yeah.
We'll have to agree to disagree on that one.
Yes. Well, so if you've been listening to me this whole time and you think maybe I know what I'm talking about, then go and watch it. It's very easy to get. It's like available on HBO Max and all the derivatives now. So you don't even have to probably pay a whole lot for it or risk getting COVID. So low barrier for entry. But I'm glad we got a chance to get into this in detail because, spoiler alert, The Matrix Resurrections will appear on my top 10 of 2021.
Deep sigh.
Deep sigh.
Deep sigh.
Just incidentally, what would you, if you were, because I don't think you logged this on Letterboxd yet, what would you give Resurrections out of 5?
I toyed with the idea of 3.5, but I think I ended up with a 3.
Ooh, okay. That's a big 2-star gap. That doesn't happen very often.
I know. That's why I was like, because to me, like, when I rank or rate films, I do like have a somewhat objective scale. So like all the reasons you said, the messiness, the pacing, some of the cinematography I didn't find interesting, the choreography. I didn't take marks off for it being very different from the original trilogy, which I think a lot of people did.
Yeah.
I didn't do that because I realized this is very different. But for the reasons above, I just felt you can't give a high score to something that was, in my opinion, flawed in so many different aspects.
Okay, yeah. And with me, I don't know. It hit an emotional chord.
Yeah, it spoke to you. It spoke
to me. I understood what it was trying to do. And, you know, I was on the film's wavelength. And, you know, that's worth, it's hard to put a price on that. So,
yeah, I mean, like, I don't have a lot of films ranked higher than 4.5, and I don't mean to be a miser, but it's just I have a standard for a 5-star film, and it'd be something like The Godfather Part 2, and if you're not on that level, I can't give it to you.
All right. Well, that is an excellent segue for the next half of this episode, which is all about our top 10s of 2021.
Yeah, I'm excited to do this because we haven't revealed our list to each other at all.
No, we literally were slapping them together right before we started recording, so this is very fresh.
Okay, so how do you want to do this?
Do you want to just work from 10 down to 1, or do you want to go the other way?
Sure, 10 down to 1 is always good. I like countdowns.
Okay. And now, of course, as we alluded to in the last episode, there's a lot of asterisks here because COVID has made it difficult to see some of the other 2021 films that would have probably appeared on this list if we'd had a chance to see them. So for me, things like Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza or Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley were both likely candidates to appear on this list. I have not seen them yet. They are closed. They are not available in Ontario because of COVID. So this may change in the future, but for now, here, January 2021, this is what it's at. And starting at number 10 for me is The Card Counter, a Paul Schrader film. Came out, I believe it was November 2021, starring Oscar Isaac as a PTSD-afflicted war veteran who has turned into a card sharp, touring the gambling halls and casinos of modern day United States, kind of on a bizarre, almost aimless quest to sort of try to understand what happened to him during the war. And his sort of semi-successful attempt to bring a young gambler under his wing. This gambler is played by Ty Sheridan. Along the way, he sort of falls in love, kind of, with a handler played by Tiffany Haddish in a bit of very odd casting. You would not expect Tiffany Haddish to do a film like this.
Or be matched up with Ty Sheridan.
Ty Sheridan's character doesn't fall in love with Tiffany Haddish. It's actually Oscar Isaac's character who falls in love with Tiffany Haddish. So she's clearly not seeing any red flags in Oscar Isaac's behavior, which involves staying in hotel rooms and wrapping every available piece of furniture in white cloth and twine, and writing in a diary and drinking alcohol to excess, and but being very, very good at cards. And so I feel like Jason would like this. I'd be curious to know if it might pop up on his top 10 list in the future if he saw it. But
I love movies about degenerate.
Yeah, if you've seen previous films by Paul Schrader, I mean, people will remember that he wrote Taxi Driver and Raging Bull. He's written and directed many films of his own. Lately, he's been in a bit of a career renaissance of sorts. He made First Reformed with Ethan Hawke a couple of years ago.
I love that.
And that was a fantastic film. I would say Card Counter is not quite as good as First Reformed, at least in terms of like the ideas it has or the message it's trying to impart, but it's still very stylishly done, and clearly a lot of thought has gone into the characters, so I appreciate that. Do you have any questions about The Card Counter before we move to your number 10?
I do not, other than the fact that I just want to say that I am looking forward to seeing this. I just haven't had a chance to. So it could crack my top 10. I haven't decided yet. But now that you've asked, I actually have 2 films tied for 10th. So
okay,
as you said, this list is really fluid. So if The Card Counter is good, maybe it'll bump both of these films. So in 10th place, I have a tie between Ridley Scott's The Last Duel and Official Competition, which is a Spanish comedy film featuring Penelope Cruz, Antonio Banderas, and Oscar Martinez. Penelope Cruz plays Lola, who is this renowned director, and she's trying to make a film, but she has to contend with the 2 big egos of Antonio Banderas' character Felix and Oscar Martinez's characters Yvonne. I thought this was a really clever, funny film. We talked about satire and being self-referential. I appreciate these ones more just because they're not so much on the nose. They kind of bring up this fictional story and populate it with sort of, social commentary and little barbs at the industry. The Last Duel I just enjoyed partly because of Ridley Scott. I think it's a fairly well-directed film. I think it's not without its flaws because it can be a tedious watch, but I appreciate the acting that went into it. Jodie Comer was amazing, and I love the production value in it.
And if you want more detail on any of those, we've talked about them both in previous episodes. So
correct.
Yeah, you can. We'll try to refer to those in the episode description to help you find those episodes. Yeah, I have no notes on either of those. I've been planning to see The Last Duel the first chance I get. I don't know that it's available on VOD yet for some reason.
Not yet.
So that's in my near future, I imagine. Should we move on to number 9?
Please.
So for my number 9, The Power of the Dog, which we talked about in the last episode, I think. And as we talked about at the time, I think I really like a lot of I admire a lot of the technical aspects of this. I'm kind of hovering above this movie a little bit. I'm like, yeah, it's in a bubble for me. I individually can select bits that I like about it. I love the Western genre in general. I'm kind of like, I'm admiring the technique of all the actors, but it's staying at number 9 for me because I don't really feel a strong emotional connection to it. I don't think I will be revisiting it anytime soon. I know you liked it less than I did, so
yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if this doesn't crack your list at all.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. But yeah, you can refer to that last episode if you want more details on The Power of the Dog. Incidentally, it probably will be popping up at the Oscars, so if you're the kind of Oscars completionist that I am, you may end up needing to watch it in order to feel fully informed about the race as it develops. What's your number 9?
This one's going to be on your list, but probably way higher. Number 9 for me is Dune.
You put Dune at number 9?
I did.
This is insane to me.
So the same thing you said about like the technical aspects of The Power of the Dog. To me, Dune really succeeds based on at a technical level. On a narrative and story level, I couldn't get with it. When I watched it first time in theaters, it was a really great experience because you had the big sound, the big screen. And that, I think, for this film makes a huge difference. Story-wise, partially because it's only part 1, and partially because I'm more interested in what happens after the events of Dune Part 1. I can't elevate this any higher than beyond just the technical aspects of it. I watched it again at home with a fairly decent TV, but the story just wasn't compelling enough to me. I think in terms of the characters, especially with Chani, I think they made some interesting choices about how to introduce her and what to do with her. And so for that reason, I mean, Dune almost didn't make the list, so you should be happy, Rob.
Okay. I'll take my wins where I can get them, I suppose. All right, so for my number 8, I've got Spencer, which, again, another segment out there in a previous episode.
It got snubbed.
Yeah, well, it got snubbed at the SAGs, but I don't know. I mean, the SAGs don't always predict everything Oscar related. So we'll see. If it would be a shame if Kristen Stewart is left out of the Oscar nominations. It may very well happen. I mean, maybe the Academy is still dealing with, seeing her as the girl from Twilight after all these years, but whatever. No, I think it's a very, very involving film. I like biopics that focus on specific periods of time in a person's life as opposed to trying to survey their whole existence.
Yeah.
And that's what this film does. It's the music by Johnny Greenwood is very, very interesting. It's almost like a character in the film of its own. And it's got it acts as like a good counterpoint to the stuff that we see right now in The Crown on Netflix. It's kind of like a weird little spin-off of that, or like although it's stylistically very different. So if you're into the Royals at all, highly recommend it. What's your number 8?
My number 8 is The Green Knight, David Lowery's medieval fantasy.
Okay.
This is kind of like Dune, where like I think I appreciate the technical aspects of it more than the story itself. I think in The Green Knight, the story is interesting, but there are times where I think it kind of lagged and I didn't fully understand what he was going for. But everything else about it, I really appreciated. So number 8 is The Green Knight.
My number 7 is a documentary that I saw at TIFF, I believe it was TIFF, called Flea, which I mentioned in the episode about TIFF, but it's actually an animated documentary. And I know you feel a little bit weird sometimes about how to handle documentaries in these situations. But,
yeah.
But this one was so artfully done, where it was using animation to sketch out long repressed memories something that would be very difficult to capture if the filmmakers hadn't been following this person through his entire life, because it's dealing with a refugee from Afghanistan and all of the horrible experiences that he had on his long route to escape Afghanistan during the period of time that he grew up. And it uses this almost like rotoscoped it looks like a rotoscoped animation, but it's not quite that. It's more traditional animation, just to drop you right into the environment of this guy and his family members. And it's almost entirely done through his voiceover, just sort of recounting what happened to him. So I would not be surprised if this either is like a nominee for Best Documentary at the Oscars, if not goes home with the prize.
So number 7, you hit it right on the head. I don't mix fictional movies with documentaries. I think documentaries are kind of like in their own separate category.
Okay, all right.
But at number 7, I have Pig. This is the Nicolas Cage film directed by Michael Sarnowski.
I'm very glad you saw this.
Oh, yeah. Nicolas Cage plays this reclusive former chef whose prized truffle pig gets stolen. And I just love this film because I love the atmosphere it's in. I love how slowly, bit by bit, we learn about the characters and the story and the different layers to it. And I don't want to spoil it, but the conclusion, the way that this reclusive man deals with all sorts of physical and mental obstacles, to me was like a really great ending, something that we don't really see in film.
Yeah.
A lot of people have talked about how, everyone expects Nicolas Cage to go crazy.
Yeah.
And he kind of does, but he really reins it in here. I don't think it's his best performance, but I loved him in this role, and I loved the how it really just kind of sucks you into the very end.
Yes, I agree. This is going to pop up for me in a few slots. I rated it a bit higher, but yeah, I saw it when it came out. I was totally impressed by how, it had been marketed as more of like a John Wick style revenge film, possibly, or that there was an implication that was what the film was, but it's very much not that. It's a lot more about compassion and
what a Rickroll.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. And yeah, I would easily rank it within like top 10 performances for him specifically, if not top 5, because and it's hilarious to me that he can alternate between doing something like this and then something like Prisoners of the Ghostland in the same year.
Number 6.
All right, so my number 6 is also like Flea. It's a little bit controversial for Jason's taste, but this is Bo Burnham's Netflix special Inside, and I'm counting this as a film because it's feature length, and it's very despite being from a guy who's mostly known for doing stand-up comedy or stage shows, it's entirely written, directed, performed by him, and it's a single cohesive story, in as much as it's recounting a sort of fictionalized version of his response to COVID lockdown and all of the, not just COVID itself, but all of the societal internet-based pressures that he finds weighing on him as he's stuck indoors. And it's so creative. It's so visually arresting, despite very limited resources that he has at his disposal. And some of the songs are just fantastic, and I'm humming them to myself even months later. So
this is a movie that I have to see, and I don't mind that you include it on this list because it's not really a documentary. It's just a movie with one central character and a lot of narration. And we've seen that before. Like, it works.
Yes, and it is fictionalized in the sense of, like, if you know anything about Bo Burnham, you know that he's in a long-term relationship with his partner, Lorraine Scafaria, who, they have a nice house in LA. So the tiny room that this is based in is very much not how he really passed COVID lockdown. Mm-hmm. So we are getting his kind of like heightened version of himself, or this characterized version of himself. So I think that's enough to kind of meet my standard.
You thought your pick at number 6 was controversial? Let me drop a bomb on you.
Okay, hit me with it.
Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Yeah, I'm not surprised this is on here.
So This film was interesting because it was very divisive among critics, because a lot of them really appreciated it for what it was, and a lot of them said the same things as their original review. It's like it's a bloated superhero film that's really messy and kind of is way too convoluted for its own good.
Yep.
I get all of that, but I just like this version, how it's all put together, how Cyborg is so integral and such an emotional part of the story, and I loved every minute of it. I think there are certain flaws about it for sure, but I have yet to see like an epic superhero film like this that's 4 hours long. One of my favorite movies is Gods and Generals, and that's like a 4-hour talky Civil War film. And to me, Justice League is kind of in the similar vein, where they're really hashing out every little single detail. But being a comic book fan and being a fan of Batman, I really liked it, and I loved that Zack Snyder got his redemption story.
Yeah, well, and as we said in our epic episode that was totally dedicated to this movie, I can see the value in having this as your top 10, especially if we
hated Joss Whedon's version. Yes.
Well, yeah, and if you connect with Zack Snyder as a filmmaker, I think that's really important. I mean, he's not a filmmaker that speaks to me, but I can see the changes that he made to this. I can appreciate, how big of a swing it was to go from what we had in 2017 to what we're getting now. So yeah, it's I'm not going to dispute this too much for being on your list.
I think this is really one of the best looking superhero movies we've had.
Yeah, well, it's got a visual style, which you can't say for a lot of the stuff that comes out.
Exactly. So anyway, number 4.
No, number 5 for me.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, number 5. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, number 5. You're right.
Yeah, so number 5, we have already talked about it. It's Pig.
Okay.
I bumped it up a few notches above where you put it. But yeah, for all the reasons I just said, easy pick for number 5 for me. What's yours?
Number 5 for me is Sean Baker's Red Rocket.
Ah, okay. Yeah, this is one I haven't seen. So.
Yeah, okay. So this kind of started low because sometimes when you watch Sean Baker films, you feel a little bit dirty because some of his characters are so despicable, right?
Yeah.
But I really don't think I don't really think any director right now really captures a certain social class of people better than he does.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And I love the way he captured small town Texas. I love the performance from Simon Rex as this like manic sort of snake oil salesman. I thought it was really funny. And this movie really like slowly climbed up the list as I watched other films because I wasn't sure where to rank it, but I keep thinking back to it and I feel like I just enjoy this movie so much more than the other ones I've seen.
Yeah. No, as soon as this becomes more easily available on streaming, I'm definitely going to check it out. I really like Tangerine. I love the Florida Project, so I'm curious to see what this is all about.
It's not on the same level as Florida Project, but I still think it's very much in the same sort of tier.
So then for number 4, for me, we've also touched on it before, The Green Knight. I'm also bumping this up a little bit above where Jason placed it because for me, I connected with it a little bit more maybe because I had read the original poem in university.
Right.
I was familiar with how people like J.R.R. Tolkien had been involved in translating it from its original language to English. And I loved this post-apocalyptic almost vibe that I got from the film.
Yeah.
Where it felt like the age of chivalry had passed everyone by in this film. And, there was the days of King Arthur and his knights were long past. And now we had this kind of upstart generation coming on their heels who weren't really up to the task of being quite so bold and noble. And, the big battles were sort of passing them by. And I liked that window into a different type of Arthurian legend.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I was kind of skeptical at first, but the one thing I kind of want to just add to that is I thought Dev Patel was perfect casting.
Yes. Oh yeah, 100%. How about your number 4?
So number 4, this is where like on my list this year especially, or this past year I should say, it's a lot more commercial for obvious reasons because those were the only films that were like accessible via theater. Mm-hmm. So at number 4, I have No Time to Die.
Oh, okay. Yep.
I really love this film. I thought it was a really great send-off for Daniel Craig. There are certain parts where I found weak, which we've talked about, which is mainly the villain.
Yes.
But for the most part, I really enjoyed Daniel Craig's run as Bond. fitting end, and he's really, I think maybe for our generation, the James Bond.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So easy number 4 for me.
Well, we can continue talking about it because it's my
that's your number 3.
It's my number 3.
Okay.
Perfect segue. So yeah.
So like sometimes our lists are like similar but different, right?
Yeah, just we're off by a few steps here and there.
Yeah.
For all those reasons that you just said. Yeah, it's my number 3. I'd been looking forward to it for a while. Of course, it had been the kind of standard bearer for the canceled COVID film. So there had been a lot of build up to it, and thankfully it was able to deliver on those expectations and also surpass them in certain ways. We are seeing, maybe because the filmmakers felt, spoilers ahead for those who haven't seen it, they felt empowered to let this version of Bond die. I think they were willing to finally take the character to places that they hadn't taken him before, where he showed some interest in being a family man and settling down with one woman and finally giving up the spy life after, feeling like he wanted to do it for literally decades in various incarnations. So we saw all those angles on the character that the series had not been comfortable to do before, and it was kind of fascinating to watch, and Daniel Craig and all the co-stars pulled it off while still inserting all of the stuff that you want from a Bond film, like the scene in the sequence in Cuba between him and Ana de Armas's character, which was just so much fun and made me want to see her return in whatever format the series comes back in. So
I've seen No Time to Die like 4 times within the past half a year.
Really?
And it's great every time.
Oh yeah,
there's a lot of rewatchability.
Yeah. Okay, great. How about your number 3?
You go first. Oh, you just talked about your number 3. God, get with it, buddy.
It's like he's never done top 10 before.
Yeah, I know. Number 3, this one you're going to find controversial. This one is Spider-Man No Way Home.
Okay. All right.
I kind of flip-flop between this and No Time to Die, but Spider-Man, we talked about, the cultural significance in that episode we talked about. I think it's still relevant. I loved how it was basically, I think, a Herculean effort for Sony and Marvel to work together and put out something that's so good. So it hits all the notes I wanted. It's one of my favorite superhero films of all time now. I've yet to watch it again, and I'm looking forward to get to that, though. So
yeah, I won't drag you down too badly on this. I mean, I can see why people who are really big fans of Spider-Man will obviously really connect with this for all the reasons we got into when we discussed the movie originally.
It's a huge audience favorite, and I'm with the crowd this time.
Okay. Hey, I'm glad you can be with the crowd occasionally. You spend most of your time kind of booing on the sidelines, so
yeah, that's true. What's happening? Number 2.
All right, number 2 for me. Okay, well, we just dedicated half an hour to it. It's The Matrix Resurrections, number 2 for me. I know this would never appear on your top 10, but yeah, I had to get it in there because there's very few 5 stars that I give out in a given year.
I know. You know what? Maybe you ruined it for me. You giving it 5 stars maybe ruined it for me.
We're going to have to make some kind of pact where we just ignore each other's letterbox ratings before we've both seen it or something.
Yeah, or just ignore each other completely.
All right, so then what's your number 2?
Number 2 for me is The Worst Person in the World.
Oh, okay.
The Norwegian romantic comedy drama, however you want to call it. I was so surprised by this and by how much I liked it. I kind of walked in blind. I knew it was part of the Oslo trilogy. And I know that stories aren't related to each other, but I was just caught up in this love story about this. Sometimes, this millennial who sometimes needed to be whacked over the head. But I definitely cheered for her every step of the way. I think this movie doesn't work without the performance we got from Renate Reinsve. Hopefully I said that name right. But if you do get a chance, this is getting a Criterion treatment. So it's good.
Yep.
And I loved the whole, relationships that she had. It's a bit weird in how it's split up and edited into like different chapters, but I think that's really minor.
Yeah. No, I can usually follow that kind of stuff when it comes my way. So yeah, as soon as it's more widely available, definitely going to check that one out. So should we do our number 1 pick of 2021?
I think I know what yours is.
Okay, yeah. So mine is Dune.
Yeah.
For all the reasons that we went into in our big Dune episode, one of my rare 5 stars from the year, but for me, significantly less messy and less to quibble over than in Matrix Resurrections. So of course it has to take the top slot. I cannot wait to see it again. I am very, very curious to see how it will look playing on like a top quality Blu-ray on my nice home theater system, how that will compare to the theatrical experience. I do recognize that, yeah, it's only half a film and there's still a lot left for them to conclude. But if the second part is anything like the first, it ought to come together in a nice, beautiful little package. So
yeah, I think once I see the second part, I'll view it as like one film.
Yeah. Well, like Infinity War and Endgame are kind of like that for me too. So
yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
So what's your number one?
So number one was a really hard spot to pick because there were a lot of films that were really good. But this one stood out to me because of how much I've enjoyed it and the subject material, and that's Judas and the Black Messiah.
All right.
This is the Shaka King movie that I feel like everyone's kind of forgotten, starring Daniel Kaluuya as Fred Hampton, and it's a story about how basically the Black Panther Party started. I don't know where this ranks on your list, but this is a 2021 film, according to Letterboxd and Wikipedia, even though it has already been nominated in the previous Academy Awards. So I have no idea how that's going to work, but this film is incredible. I love the direction. I love the acting. The story is really intense, and I really highly recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we first talked about this, I wasn't as blown away by it. I felt a little bit like it was kind of too similar to other kind of survey films from that period of history. It felt a little bit too similar to like Trial of the Chicago 7, things like that. Partially because it occupies a similar period in history. But I can recognize that like Shaka King was focusing on a very specific, perspective, and he was trying to do justice to the story in a way that maybe, to be blunt, the way a white filmmaker might not have done it. So
no, 100% I agree with you.
But one thing that did take me out of the experience, and one reason why it probably would only be in like, say, my, I don't know, somewhere between top 11 to top 20, that range, is just that some of the music choices really brought me out of the experience at the time. I found them really jarring, and I didn't really understand what Shaka King was going for there, but who knows, maybe a second watch would clear that up for me.
Fair.
Yeah, so that is our top 10 of 2021. Let us know what you think about it, Hit us up on Twitter and scream at us if you think we missed something, or if, you agree with me that Matrix Resurrections is a revelation, to choose another RE word.
Wow. That's a great one. I will just say whoever, slanders Justice League gets an automatic block.
Wow, that's a little bit of a harsh response or so.
I will not accept it.
Okay, all right.
You totally missed the point.
Major Snyder bro over here. But yeah, that about does it for this episode. My name is Robert Snow in Toronto.
And my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
The Extra Buttery Podcast is written, recorded, and produced by Jason Chen and Robert Snow. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to rate and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. And remember, popcorn is always better with extra butter.